A storm often begins long before anyone hears the thunder. And on the night the Hawthorne estate summoned its heir home, an unseen tension already stirred in the air. The heavy oak doors opened with a low groan as Julian Hawthorne stepped inside, the sound of his shoes echoing through the marble foyer. The house smelled of polished wood and expensive perfume, but beneath it lingered something colder, an unmistakable sense of betrayal. He had been pulled from a critical New York investor meeting and flown to Boston without explanation. Summoned by his parents with a tone that tolerated no refusal, he expected drama. He did not expect this. Julian strode into the sitting room, where Reginald Hawthorne folded his newspaper with surgical precision, while Margaret Hawthorne, poised in pearls, watched him with an expression sharp enough to cut steel. "I hope this is not what it looks like," Julian said. "We're not asking," Reginald replied. "You are getting married." Julian gave a short, mirthless laugh. "You must be joking." "She's a good woman," Margaret added evenly. "Modest background, yes, but respectable." "A modest background?" Julian scoffed. "Meaning she doesn't come from a family with a ledger thicker than ours?" Reginald's eyes hardened. "She did something for this family we can never repay." "So this is charity," Julian muttered, turning away. "Or settling some invisible debt." "This is a chance," Margaret snapped softly. "For both of you." Julian faced them, fury rising. "You want me to marry someone I've never met who won't even show her face? You expect me to stand at the altar and hope for the best?" "She wears a veil for personal reasons," Reginald said. "You will respect it." "That is precisely what I will not do," Julian bit out. "How am I supposed to trust someone who hides behind fabric?" "You'll meet her tomorrow," Margaret replied, her voice brooking no argument. "And you will treat her with decency. I don't owe her anything." "You owe this family everything," Reginald said. "And one day you'll see she is worth far more than you imagine." Julian stormed out. The veranda air was cool against his skin, but not enough to quiet the rage burning beneath it. The next evening the estate felt unnaturally still, as if even the walls braced for disaster. Julian waited in the drawing room, adjusting the cuffs of his black shirt. Margaret entered first, followed by a tall young woman in a cream dress. She moved with quiet grace, head bowed, face hidden beneath a sheer white veil that fell past her chest. Only soft golden hair and a pair of solemn slate-blue eyes were visible. "This is Ilara Ward," Margaret announced lightly. "Ilara, this is Julian." "It's a pleasure to meet you, Mr. Hawthorne," Ilara said softly. Julian offered no handshake, no smile. Only a cold, silent stare. She did not flinch. His mother hissed a reprimand, but Julian had already turned away. To him, she was nothing more than a stranger wrapped in mystery, one he had no interest in unraveling. The wedding was arranged with the grandiosity expected of the Hawthorne name. Chandeliers glittered above towering floral arrangements, while a string quartet played a somber melody that did little to soften the tension crawling through the crowd. White roses lined every corridor, but the air felt tight, as though every guest waited for something to crack. The whispers traveled quickly. "She always wears that veil. What is she hiding? A scar? An illness?" "No one marries unseen unless a debt is owed." Julian stood at the altar, shoulders rigid beneath his navy suit, ignoring the murmurs. He simply wanted the ordeal over. When the music shifted, all heads turned. Ilara appeared on the arm of a distant relative, her simple gown modest and elegant. Her veil remained in place, concealing everything but her steady eyes and golden hair. Julian did not reach for her hand. The officiant carried on awkwardly. The vows were exchanged with all the warmth of a business transaction. Julian's voice was flat. Ilara's quiet but steady, when instructed to kiss the bride. Julian leaned forward and brushed the edge of her veil, a gesture devoid of emotion, prompting hollow applause. The reception was lavish, but joyless. Julian avoided Ilara entirely. ducking away for phone calls or imaginary obligations. She remained at the table, poised despite the loneliness woven into every moment. Later, she followed him into the library. As tradition required, "You might have at least pretended to enjoy it," Julian said bitterly. "I didn't come here to pretend," she answered calmly. "Then why are you here?" He snapped. "What are you hiding? What's behind that veil that's so terrible you can't even look your own husband in the eye?" Ilara did not move. The firelight shimmered against her veil, but she made no attempt to raise it. "I never asked to be your wife," she said at last. Julian faltered. "And I never asked anyone to repay me. Nor did I ask you to love me." For the first time that night, Julian had no counterattack. Doubt crept in slow, unwelcome, and lodged somewhere beneath his ribs. Days passed in uneasy quiet. The estate's silence felt heavier now, shaped by two strangers sharing a roof while pretending the other did not exist. Julian buried himself in work, leaving early, returning late, sleeping often in the guest room or his study. He barely acknowledged Elara. The staff noticed. Whispers followed them through the corridors, yet Ilara remained a steady presence. She helped in the kitchen, offered kindness to the gardeners, listened to the butler's concerns. But the person she cared for most was Margaret Hawthorne, who had grown frail with trembling hands and dizzy spells. Unasked, Ilara tended to her, adjusting cushions, preparing gentle meals, reading old novels aloud when Margaret felt weak. And Margaret, once formidable, softened in her presence. One evening Julian overheard them, their quiet laughter drifting from the drawing room. Margaret praised Ilara's ability to see through people. Ilara replied that she had simply spent most of her life being observed. "You're the best thing to happen to this house in years," Margaret whispered. Julian stepped away before they noticed him, unsettled by the strange warmth tightening his chest. A few nights later, he walked in the garden with Margaret and asked the question gnawing at him. "You were against this marriage. Now you treat her like family. What did she do?" Margaret stopped walking. "She saved my life, Julian. Not metaphorically, literally." He stared. "I'll tell you someday," she said. "For now, try seeing her with clearer eyes." That night, Julian lay awake, wind rattling the windows as his thoughts circled the truth. He'd refused to see. Ilara Ward had changed something within their home, and within him, and he had no idea how deep her story went. The Hawthorne estate settled into an uneasy rhythm, one shaped by distance, politeness, and unspoken questions that lingered like shadows in every corridor. Yet beneath the quiet surface, a shift had begun. Julian Hawthorne found his gaze drawn to Ilara Ward more often than he cared to admit, observing the small details he had previously ignored, the steady way she carried herself, the careful kindness she offered to everyone except him, the unassuming grace hidden beneath her veil. But he kept those observations locked behind his ribs. Days stretched into weeks. Margaret Hawthorne's exhaustion worsened, and Ilara's presence at her side grew constant. The older woman often rested in the sunroom, where soft light filtered through gold-trimmed windows and warmed the pale fabric of Ilara's veil. Ilara read aloud to her, sometimes recounting stories Margaret had nearly forgotten. On those afternoons, the house felt momentarily lighter. Julian began to notice strange details. Margaret's medication bottle shifting places, handwritten notes discarded in the wastebasket, doctors who arrived unexpectedly and left with guarded expressions. Questions crawled into his mind, refusing to leave. One evening he approached the sunroom, hesitant. Through the partially shut door he heard Ilara's voice, quiet but firm. "You have to tell him eventually." "I don't know how," Margaret whispered. "And he will resent me for it." "He might," Ilara said gently. "But he has a right to know what happened." Julian stepped back before they discovered him, the faint crackle of unease sparking beneath his skin. Later that night, Thunder rolled over the estate as Julian stood outside Alara's door. He lifted his hand to knock, paused, lowered it again. The hall felt colder than usual, haunted by the weight of questions he wasn't ready to voice. Inside her room, Alara sat by the window with a book on her lap, though she wasn't reading. Rain streaked the glass in quiet rivulets. She listened to Julian's retreating footsteps. The ache in her chest unfamiliar but difficult to ignore. It wasn't long before another shift in the household forced everything into motion. Margaret collapsed during breakfast. China shattered across the marble floor as Margaret slumped forward, her teacup slipping from her fingers. The room exploded into chaos, servants rushing forward, Reginald shouting orders, Julian catching his mother before she hit the ground. Alara knelt beside them instantly, guiding Margaret's head to her lap with steady hands. Breath slow, Alara murmured. Just like before. The paramedics arrived within minutes, voices clipped and urgent. Margaret was taken to a private medical wing within the estate, a place Julian had barely known existed. He was barred from entering until the doctors stabilized her. Hours passed with agonizing slowness. Reginald paced like a caged animal. Julian sat rigidly in a leather chair, his hands clasped so tightly his knuckles whitened. Alara remained still as a statue, the thin layer of her veil trembling each time she exhaled. Finally a physician emerged, speaking quietly to Reginald. Julian caught fragments: worsening, complications, previous incident, and the chill beneath his skin deepened. When the doctor left, Reginald turned to Alara with a haunted resignation. You'll have to tell him, he said. There's no avoiding it now. Alara nodded once. Julian's pulse hammered. Tell me what? Alara approached him slowly, as though afraid he might break. Come with me, she said. He followed her into the study, his father's old domain, filled with leather-bound books and decades of unspoken secrets. Rain lashed against the windows, wind rattling the glass. Alara stood near the fireplace, fingers knit together tightly. Your mother's illness isn't new, she said quietly. And I'm the reason she survived the first time. Julian stared at her. What do you mean? She collapsed 2 years ago, Alara continued. I was working at the hospital then. I was in the hall when she was brought in. Julian frowned. You were a nurse? A volunteer, she corrected. I was studying to become a physician's assistant. Her condition was complicated. The doctors didn't expect her to make it through the night. She drew in a breath, steadying herself. I wasn't supposed to be in the room. But I saw something the others missed. Your mother had an allergic reaction to a medication they assumed she could tolerate. I recognized the symptoms early enough to intervene. They said afterward that if someone hadn't acted, she would have died within minutes. Julian felt the room tilt slightly. Why didn't anyone tell me? He asked. Your parents wanted to forget it happened, Alara said softly. But your mother insisted on thanking me. She invited me to visit the estate. And then things changed. Julian's voice sharpened. They asked you to marry me as repayment. No one forced me, Alara replied. Your mother was convinced I could help keep her stable long term. She didn't trust many people, but she trusted me. And she believed you would eventually fall in line? Julian snapped. Accept an arranged marriage based on a medical emergency? Alara recoiled slightly, though she did not step back. She believed you would see me. Not just the veil. Not just the circumstances. Emotion flared behind Julian's eyes: anger, confusion, something far more vulnerable. You never told me, he said, voice low. You let me treat you like a stranger, Alara finished. Because that's what I was to you. And I couldn't force you to want this marriage. The fire crackled between them, casting uneasy shadows. Julian turned away, pressing a hand to his forehead. Why the veil, Alara? Why hide your face from everyone, including me? She hesitated, then lifted the edge of the fabric slightly, not enough for him to see beneath. "I will tell you," she said. "But not now. Not while your mother is fighting to breathe." As if summoned by her words, Reginald appeared in the doorway. "She's awake," he said. The three of them hurried to Margaret's room. The medical wing smelled of antiseptic and cold metal. Margaret lay pale against the pillows, her breathing thin but steady. When she saw Julian, her eyes softened. "My darling boy," she whispered weakly. "Don't be harsh with her." Julian sat beside her bed. "You should have told me." "I wanted to," she said, coughing lightly. "But I thought, if you had time, if you saw who she was, you might understand why we chose her." Julian glanced at Alara, who remained by the doorway. Hands clasped tightly at her waist, Margaret reached out a trembling hand. Julian took it. "Promise me something," she murmured. "Take care of her, and let her take care of you." Julian swallowed hard. "Rest, Mother. We'll talk later." In the dim hallway outside the medical wing, Ilara finally spoke. "You don't have to accept me," she said. "But your mother needs you. And she needs calm, not resentment." Julian exhaled, long and unsteady. "I don't know how to feel. Everything I knew. Everything I assumed." "You don't have to decide tonight," Ilara said gently. Days later, as Margaret slowly recovered, an unexpected truth settled into Julian's thoughts. Ilara Ward was no longer just a mystery behind a veil. She was a force woven into the fabric of his family's survival. And for the first time, he wondered what it might mean to truly see her. But with every answer he uncovered, a deeper question waited, one tied not only to Ilara's past but to the secret she still held behind her veil. And that unanswered truth would change everything.